The majority of doctors in America say that they are frustrated by patients who don't finish all of the medication prescribed to them, especially after they start to feel better.
Those bottles of unused medications in cabinets and on nightstands are the focus of the National Prescription Drug Take-Back Day happening this Saturday. Medications found in the home are a major source of first access to opioids for teens and young children. Our next guest, though, says the DEA, which sponsors the annual event, is a much bigger culprit in our national epidemic.
Harry Nelson is the founder and co-managing partner of the Nelson Hardiman Law Firm. He joins us with his new book titled The United States of Opioids, a prescription for liberating a nation in pain. Good morning. Good to have you back.
Great to be with you guys.
So do you support this event, and how big is the impact of Take Back Day in reducing the introduction of opioids?
I 100% support Take Back Day. It's an important event, and getting unused drugs out of people's medicine cabinets and out of the reach of children and other people in the house is a really important priority. So I'm with the DA on that issue.
And we will get to your issues with the DA in a second, but a report came out this week that many doctors are prescribing opioids using guidelines that were put out in 2016. Is that the doctor's responsibility or the government's responsibility?
So technically, what normally happens with most medical conditions is that doctor groups nationally put together protocols for treatment. What's really been missing with regard to opioids are any clear protocols for how you use opioids for different kinds of care. So here in California, we have medical board guidelines, and the Center for Disease Control has put out primary care guidelines, but a lot of doctors nationally think that those guidelines are only helpful for prosecuting doctors for doing things wrong, not for actually treating patients. So there is a responsibility. I think the physician community should be doing it with support from the government.
In your book, you talk about the so-called push-down pop-up problem with opioids. What does that mean?
So what I mean by that is we think of the opioid crisis as a 20-year problem, really going back to the early days of Purdue Pharma marketing OxyContin and people starting to die. With the data that's come out over the last year shows that over the last 40 years, if you look at all drug sub-epidemics together, they form a tight linear exponential curve going back 40 years of overdose deaths. So what I mean by that is when we push down on opioids as we have here in LA, if you talk to people from LA County, what they'll tell you is meth is now the biggest problem. And so if we're really going to solve this crisis, it's not enough just to focus on how do we reverse opioid overdoses with medication. We need to look at the underlying issues, the social crisis of why so many people are accidentally dying, intentionally dying. We've got to look at the isolation, at the anxiety, at the stress that's really driving this crisis, or else we're never going to change anything.
We made the provocative statement at the beginning of this segment that you believe that the DEA, which sponsors the annual event, is a much bigger culprit in our national epidemic. What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is when we look at who should we blame for the opioid crisis, there's a lot of focus these days on the drug companies, and I'm not an apologist for anything about the terrible marketing done by drug companies, but we have multiple points of system failure here. And what I did in my book, when I went through and looked at what role does insurance play, what role did doctors play, I think the DEA does not get enough attention for being asleep at the wheel. So part of the story of the opioid crisis began with physician overprescribing, but we've had 10 years now of a crackdown on physicians, and what's happened is that black tar heroin, fentanyl have filled the void from illegal sources. And who was supposed to be watching our borders? Who was supposed to be watching as fentanyl poured into the country by mail? The DEA. So the DEA did nothing on that front, and meanwhile we need to be finding alternative medications, alternative sources, and if you look at who's blocking research, it's the DEA.
Are there any new drugs on the market that pose as serious of a threat when it comes to abuse and addiction that you've seen? And there's also, what we're hearing is there's a new street opioid mix as well.
Yeah, so first of all, going back to that push-down pop-up problem, there's an active market, like every other market in this country. People who are looking for drugs and people who are supplying them are constantly finding new things. So I think you're referencing a drug called Gray Death, which is, this should terrify anybody with kids. There are people on the street peddling concrete mixed with opioids and heroin and other designer drugs. It's become a huge problem in places like Atlanta, and that's just one of several of these other other drugs that pop up. There are drugs in when you go to supplement stores, there's a product called Kratom or Kratom that's a supplement coming in, and there's a big discussion about whether that's a problem, whether people are getting dependent on that. And it's a confusing world out there. There's obviously all the cannabis products, and I think you've got to be very careful. There are solutions out there, but there's a lot of bad stuff that's not being regulated and that's on the street.
All right, always interesting. Once again, the book is titled The United States of Opioids. Harry Nelson is the founder and co-managing partner at Nelson Hardiman, a law firm for healthcare providers. For more information, check out their website. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Harry.
Thanks for having me.